rethink my choices, but this is what you get. Thinking about while I was studying for this, I do understand for women that's a harder choice than it is for men. But realistically, it's an easy choice. And the majority of choices that we make are that. They're easy. The choice, am I going to work today or not? While some may debate that in their mind more than others, we all understand we have to pay our bills. So though I may not want it to be true, I have to go to work. It's really a relatively easy decision. If I want lights tomorrow, I go to work today. I mean, it's that simple. Easy decisions like, what am I going to make for dinner? What are we going to have for dinner? It's a choice that you make, but not really a hard one. We have things pretty plentiful and have so many options for things to eat that it really is easy. There are some that they have to question if they'll get to eat today. So the fact that our little choice is just, of my 15 options, what am I going to have, just shows how blessed we are. The point is, relatively easy choices, unless you're, trying to pick a restaurant with your wife, and then, Lord help us, it's, a whole different story. But relatively easy choices. And the point of it being, we make choices every day, and those choices affect both who we are and what we become. And the majority of choices that we face are easy. Many of them so easy and so repeated that we often don't even realize that we're making a choice. That we make it so often we don't even realize that we are. I'll give an example. I have made it a habit. I don't hang up the phone with my wife without telling my wife that I love her. I've been doing that since before we were married, ever since the first day that I told her I loved her over 15 years ago. Every time her and I have a conversation on the phone, I end it with, I love you. That was a choice I made back then, and I've done it so many times since that I don't even have to think about that choice now. I had to think about how to say that right, because I still think about what I'm saying. It sounds a little cold to say that, but know what I'm trying to say here. It's one of those, you've done it so many times, I don't have to choose whether or not I'm going to say it. It's a choice. Such an easy choice that I no longer really even have to make that choice. But while many of the decisions that we face fall under that category of easy, not all are. Some of the decisions that we face, as you all in here know, are really hard. I hesitated at giving examples of this because the hard decisions that you face are not always the same as the hard decisions that I face. So these examples that I give might be things that you think are really easy decisions, but it at least gets you thinking. Choices like, how do I respond when someone dislikes me? Again, it may sound funny. There may be some that this isn't a difficult choice for, but I think of myself as a very likable person. So when people get mad at me, I wrote that, I thought, there's going to be someone who's going to laugh when I say that, and that's just going to make me feel terrible. But because of that, because I think of myself as a fairly likable person, when people get mad at me, it sort of always takes me back because I think I'm super nice and easy to get along with and, likable by all, and apparently not everyone thinks that. So I'm just being very honest here. My first reaction is, what's wrong with you that you don't like me? It's a choice I have to make. Again, some of you, this may not be a problem. For me, it is. When someone makes it clear, well, they don't like me, how do I respond to that? Or hard choices like, am I going to be an example for Christ in my job, or am I just going to keep quiet? It's a hard choice, but one that we all have to make. Choices like, am I going to witness to my neighbors? And again, I get that that's a hard one. If they get mad at you, it's now going to be awkward every time you walk out your front door and see them, or at least, that's the excuse that we tell ourselves. In reality, they already know. Even if you don't live like a Christian at home, they see you and your family get up and get dressed and go to church. They know. I found it really interesting and convicting when we moved into our house that we have now. We hadn't been there long, maybe a couple of weeks, and I hadn't had opportunity yet to invite my neighbors to church, but they came to me one Sunday asking where we go every Sunday. I mean, it had only been like 2 Sundays. But they saw my family and I all comes out dressed up on Sunday morning and Sunday night and Wednesday. Where are you going? They know. But we see that as, man, that's a hard choice of if I'm going to talk to them about that or not. We have some hard choices that we have to make, and just putting them off isn't an option. We can't just ignore them. So looking at making, you have a choice, and those hard choices. Tonight our example is Noah. You want to talk about a man who had some hard choices to make? This guy. I mean, Noah is a man living for God in a world where he is the only one. We sometimes get that mentality that, boy, there's no one doing like I am. It's not true for us. It was for him. You think that was an easy choice? Tonight I want to look at 4 choices that Noah made. The first is Noah chose God. Remember, in a wicked time. Look at verse 5 with me. And God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. Wickedness was great and only growing. Noah was only the 8th generation. Men are on the earth and are multiplying, and so was their sin. Have you ever noticed how quickly sin grows? It doesn't grow in addition. It's always in multiplication. It grows so quickly in us personally, but also in our world. It amazes me to look back at recent history, because things that even 10 or 20 years ago were shunned by the world as wrong and inappropriate is now openly flaunted everywhere. Wickedness multiplies. The Bible describes that time as the wickedness is great. The Bible describes it as every imagination and only evil continually. The Bible uses those words and does so on purpose. Those are some strong words. Those are some strong words. This wasn't a matter of, the world that he lived in had some wicked men, or this wasn't a matter of that the world that he lived in, the people did some wicked things. Every imagination of their heart was only evil continually. Everything that they thought to do was evil. And yet in that world, Noah chose God. In that world, Noah walked with God. That's why he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. We saw that in verse 8 and 9. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man, a perfect in his generation. What's it say then? And Noah walked with God. It's not as if, every single person was wicked and God just, randomly chose, well, if I want to keep mankind going, I have to choose someone, so sure, I'll show Noah grace. No, it was because there was already a relationship there. Noah walked with God. That's not easy when no one else is. When no one else is walking with God and no one else is living how they ought to, it's hard to do right. That's something that is brought up in messages at like teen camps or family camps all of the time, because very often what happens in those places at teen camp is people go and they'll make a decision, and it's easy to keep decisions at camp because pretty much everyone is doing what they should. But then those kids get home and they drop those decisions because, well, their friends at home or their home, for some, aren't living the way that they committed to live, and it's a lot harder to walk with God when no one else is. Noah walked with God when no one else was. Noah heard from God when no one else did, which implies that Noah was listening. That Noah was listening. in the middle of a wicked time, surrounded by evil men, Noah was listening for God to talk. I'm not going to take a long time on this, but that's exactly what you and I need to be doing right now. And we look around and we see the wickedness of the world that we live in. And we look around and we see the evil men waxing worse and worse, and we can get caught up in that. Just listen for God. Wicked world and evil men, God still speaks to his children. Yes. Noah, in the middle of a time that God's saying that every imagination is only evil, and yet he still talked to Noah. God still speaks to his children. Noah heard from God when no one else did, because Noah chose God. Noah stood when no one else stood. Standing is never easy. I thought about for this message until I got to this place in the message, making everyone stand all through the intro and, as much of the first point as we have so far, just to, kind of pound this home a little bit. Standing is never easy, but it's harder alone. Now, you stand for a long time. It's tiring, but it's a lot easier when you're standing with people, and there's someone next to you. It's never an easy thing if you're talking about taking a stand. It's never an easy thing to take a stand against something or for something when you know there's going to be opposition. You know that when I take this stand, someone's not going to like it, and that's always the case. It doesn't matter what the stand is. Someone will always be upset at it, but that's a lot easier when you know I'm going to take this stand and people are going to stand up around me. They're going to stand up next to me. Noah took this stand knowing the state of the world he lived in. He knew that it was wicked. He saw the evil men. I don't think when God came to Noah and told him this, I don't think Noah was shocked. I don't think when time came to get on the ark, I don't think Noah was surprised that no one else was joining them. He knew that it was wicked. He saw the evil. He stood when no one else did, because Noah chose God. Second decision or choice that I want us to see, Noah chose obedience. The very last verse of chapter 6, thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. I think we could very often overlook this. It's a small verse for one thing, and then it would be easy for us just to kind of skip past this. Thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. That's a choice. That's a choice. We know that God doesn't force us to do things. God came to Noah and told him, hey, this is what I am going to do. This is what I want you to do. Noah could have said no. Noah could have decided that if I do that, if I decide to follow God's will here, I'll embarrass my kids. And I know that seems like a odd reason to not follow God, but there's a shocking number of people that won't do what God wants because, my kids might be embarrassed. Noah could have decided, hey, if I do that, God, it's going to embarrass my kids. Or if I do that, God, the neighbors are going to think I'm crazy. Or if I do that, I'm going to be ridiculed and I'm going to face persecution. If I do that, it might cost me friends. He had a choice. But Noah chose obedience. Noah chose to be obedient and preach. 2 Peter 2, verse 5, it says, we're kind of jumping in the middle here, but 2, verse 5, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. There was 120 years between when Noah was warned of God that the flood was coming and when the flood happened. That's a lot of years that Noah preached righteousness and no one listened. I mean, that's some dedication. Thinking about that, by today's ministry standards, Noah would have been considered a pastor failure. I mean, guys love going to preachers' meeting and brag about the number of people who got saved in church and baptized and families that joined the church. For 120 years, Noah preached and no one believed. But he chose to preach and he chose to continue regardless. Can you imagine how hard it would have been to not get discouraged? Can you imagine that for all of those years and no one? But Noah chose obedience and just kept preaching righteousness. Noah chose obedience and chose to build. Think about this. What God had asked him to build, Noah had never heard of before. An ark was something completely new. They would have had no need for anything like this. So God is asking him to do something completely foreign to him. And then add to it, God gave some pretty specific instructions. Tells Noah exactly how he wants it built, and thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him. He just obeyed. He didn't question, well, why does the ark have to be built this way? He didn't try to cut corners, find an easier way to do things. He didn't try to come up with a way to make the ark that would fit the times. He just did what God commanded him to do. He just followed the blueprint God gave him and chose to obey, which is really good for us to see. Because God makes it pretty clear what we are supposed to do, and we don't need to question what God told us to do, and we don't need to find an easier way, and we don't need to come up with some new way to adapt what God commanded to our current world. We just need to obey. We just need to get in God's Word and read our blueprint that He gave us and choose to obey. Noah chose to obey, and that he chose to get in the ark. Look over at chapter 7 with me, starting in verse 1. And the Lord said unto Noah, Come now, and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7, the male and the female, and of the beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by 7, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters was upon the earth, and Noah went in, and his sons, and his wife, and his sons' wives with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood. Now, Noah had followed God's way and God's plan to this point. So when God says, okay, Noah, it's time to get in the ark, he went in. Noah didn't try to talk God out of it. Noah didn't tell God he wasn't ready to leave. Noah didn't try to, I'm thinking construction. There is never a construction project that's on time. So, Noah didn't try to tell God, I've been trying to keep up with your schedule, but it's not there yet. Didn't tell God, wait, we're not ready to close this up yet. Or even Noah didn't go try to drag more people in. He just simply obeyed. He chose obedience. He chose God. Noah chose obedience. Third thing I want us to see tonight, Noah chose to trust God. Noah chose to trust God and obey Him. And I know we kind of looked at this in the last point, but we're going to see it's just a little bit different. Obeying God in this took some trust, took some faith. I made mention of it. This was all new. They hadn't heard of something like a flood. They hadn't heard of an ark. When God came to Noah, this was the first time he had heard any of this. It would have been really easy to kick against it. This is all new, and people don't like new. Even if it's good new, people don't like new. And this is all new for Noah, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to set him apart from everyone else, and yet he obeyed because he trusted that God was right, even though it went against everything he knew. That's a lot of faith. It's a lot of faith to say, this goes against everything my mind thinks, but God said it, so I'm going to obey. He chose to just trust and obey. He chose to trust and lead. remember, like any choice, this choice that Noah had was going to affect more than just him. Noah's family had to live with his choices too. If he was wrong, just follow me for a second. If Noah was wrong, think of the mockery his family would be for the rest of their days. I mean, had Noah preached for all these years and spent all these years building the ark, and then they get in and close the door and just sit there and no rain comes, it's going to be pretty awkward when you open the door and come walking back out. I mean, if God didn't do what he said he was going to do, Noah's going to be the village crazy person. And their family's never going to live something like that down because of what he did. This choice to obey affected more than just him. But not only did Noah obey, but he trusted enough that he led his family to obey. Not much is said during the time of the building about his wife or his sons wives, but he led them onto the ark. Noah trusted God with his children. He trusted that what God commanded him to do was the right thing for his kids, even if it went against everything the world would have told him to do. He trusted God enough to lead his family. Noah trusted God enough to be in the ark. Can you imagine that day when God told him, okay, it's time to get in the ark. The animals are all loaded in. The provisions are all loaded up. Food's there. You and your family get in, and God closes the door. When that door closes, I can see Noah kind of with a big gulp, well, we're committed now. There's no going back. And we don't know. The Bible doesn't depict this. All the Sunday school lessons, you look at, I'm dating myself. The flannel graph pictures all show, Noah and his family in the ark and a bunch of people gathered around it watching. And the Bible doesn't depict that, but I'm imagining all the people gathered around mocking as the doors are closed, but Noah just trusted God to get on the ark. Noah trusted God through the flood. Now, maybe I'm the only one who thinks this way, but think about this. The Bible depicts the flood as violent. It explains the fountains of the great deep are broken up and the windows of heaven opened. You can see areas around the world that the violence of this flood completely changed the form of mountains and valleys in a moment's time. I mean, this was a violent thing with a storm raging and the water crashing. And here Noah and his wife and his kids are in an untested ark on its maiden voyage in the storm of all storms. That would be terrifying. I mean, this is probably their first time in a boat, and it's in the most violent storm that ever was or ever would be. So what'd they do? They just trusted God. And then as time went on and you're now in this ark and have to be getting cabin fever and wondering if it'll ever end, they went in on the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month and I believe the 18th day. They came out his 601st year, first day of the first month. You do the math. That's a long time of seeing nothing but water. And they just trusted God. Because Noah chose to trust God. He trusted God to go out from the ark and do as God led. Turn over to chapter 8. I told you we're going to be kind of looking at some different passages. Chapter 8, verse 15. God spake unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife and thy sons' wives with thee, and bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. The flood is finally over. God has finally caused the waters to recede, and tells them, okay, it's time to go out. That would be a scary thing, because you don't know what you're walking into. I've said this in messages before, it wouldn't have been pretty. You know, the pictures, again, Sunday school and those sorts of things, the pictures all show it as a beautiful sunshiny day and the green grass and the trees. Have you ever seen a flood? There's no green grass and trees after a flood. They're gone. They're wiped away. I mean, it's pretty is not how I would describe what it looks like after a major flood. It's destructive. They had no idea what they were walking out into. They had no idea of the hazards that were going to be there. They had no idea of the carnage that they might see. And while I'm sure that they were excited to finally get out of the ark, I have to assume that there was some reservations. I mean, you're looking out that window, seeing the violence that's happened all this time, and then going, I have to walk out there. I don't know what I'm going to find. But they just chose to trust God, as Noah made a choice. Noah chose God. Noah chose obedience. Noah chose to trust God. And then the last choice that I want us to see Noah made tonight, kind of in a different light, Noah chose to sin. Look over at chapter 9 with me. Verse number 20 is where we're going to start. Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine and was drunk and was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it on their back, laid it upon, let me try that again. And Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and went backward and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem and Canaan shall be his servant. God enlarged Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And then it goes on, Noah lived after the flood 350 years. I'm not going to tonight go deep into this at all, but I want to point it out this way. Noah, a man of faith. Noah, this man that who chose to follow God when no one else was, and this man who obeyed God in a world of evil men, and this man who trusted God through all sorts of difficult things, wasn't perfect. He sinned. And while this is the only sin of his that we see in the Bible, I think it's pretty safe to say this wasn't the only time that he sinned. It's probably pretty safe to say that before the flood, when Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord, that Noah was a sinner back then too. But he was a sinner who was a willing servant of God who walked with God, which is good for us to see, because you and I, we may do our very best to choose to do right. It might be that you strive, that I'm gonna strive to choose God, and I'm gonna strive to be obedient to God, and I'm gonna strive to trust God. But there'll be times you mess up, because you also aren't perfect. But when you do, choose to get back on track. Choose to turn back. Before the flood, talked about Noah walked with God. That wasn't because Noah never messed up and Noah never tripped. It was because Noah just kept getting up and walking with God again. So, conclusion this evening. Noah had some hard choices to make, and I just want to put it this way, and so do you and I. Let me challenge you tonight. Choose God over everything else. I know there are things that are important to each one of us. I get that. Choose God over that. Choose to obey, even if you're the only one that's obeying. Even if what God asks you to do doesn't make sense, or even if what God asks you to do terrifies you, choose to obey. Choose to trust to trust His leading and to trust His protection. Choose to get back on the path, that when you mess up, because you will, you'll turn right back to God. I want to, this evening, really boil this all down to this one statement, and I'll be finished. When facing hard choices, that's what I'm trying to focus on with this message. When facing hard choices, choose God. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you will help us to see from this example of Noah, Lord, and I think in prayer I want to try and boil it down to the same statement that I ended with, Lord. When we are facing those hard choices of life, which we all face, Lord, help us to choose you above all else. Above those things that are important to us, and above our securities, and above our worldly knowledge, help us to choose you. Lord, help us to choose that we're going to obey your leading in our life, whatever that is, whether it makes sense or not, and help us to choose that we're going to trust you, and help us to choose that when we fall, when we don't keep those other three, that we'll get right back up and get right back to walking